Zoe Raven and I run Acorn Early Years, so I'm the CEO, but I've been running it since the very beginning when I started it as a single, very small nursery. I bought a converted Wesleyan chapel, lived upstairs with my growing family for 10 years, and then it was purely by accident I grew the organisation into the organisation it is now, which is 13 nurseries. So I started off in a very hands-on role, but have become less hands-on. But I'm very passionate about the profession of early years care and education. So my involvement is quite often now with training, developing, supporting the staff. And so I'm delighted to have the opportunity to encourage people to enter the profession. And we do see it as a profession. It's not just babysitting. It is not just looking after children while their parents are at work. That is an important part of it. But care, childcare and care, I think is very undervalued. And I think it needs to be taken seriously. I think the COVID pandemic has helped us to take it a little bit more seriously in terms of nursing care and social care. But childcare is no different. And actually what I have seen over the last 30 years is an increased recognition of the importance of respectful care for children, putting children at the heart of what we're all about, and that we don't just treat them like little objects that need to be herded into one room or dealt with as if they're all the same. Every child is unique, and we have to work with that. It's probably one of the only jobs where it's an absolute obligation on you as a practitioner to have fun. So you have to have an enthusiasm and a love of children to be successful in working with children. But the sound of children laughing is a sign that you're doing a good job. So the first and foremost priority in any nursery is that the children are happy. The learning comes next, because children will not learn anything if they're not happy. So making the children happy, settled, emotionally secure is the absolute top priority. Not as easy as you think. If you've got your own children, you will know that some things you do work very successfully. You know how to make that particular child tick. When you're dealing with other people's children, you've got to learn what makes them tick. And that's not as easy as with your own children. Sometimes it's easier than with your own children, I have to say. But it's something that you learn through experience. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit about what you need to be a successful early years practitioner. Experience of working with children, but not necessarily working with children, playing with children, being with children is really, really valuable. So if you've had your own family, or you've been around small children, or any children, to be honest, is a huge advantage. If you're coming into childcare with absolutely no experience of what children are all about, if you don't have any qualifications or any experience, you will be starting right at the very bottom, and you will have to get some experience before you even decide whether it's what you want, because people sometimes do have rose-tinted spectacles on about what it's like to work with children. Yes, it's lots of fun, but it's also very hard work. You do need lots of energy, you need lots of enthusiasm, and you need huge amounts of patience, because they will test your buttons. The difference, though, I think, with working with children in a nursery or a preschool, an early years setting, is that you're not on your own. You're never on your own. So it's not like childminding. If you like working with, if you want to care for children in your own home, and you've done that as a parent, then by all means go down the childminding route, because that may suit you absolutely fine. And you don't have to be a young parent with children of your own to be a childminder. So if you want to work with children in your own home, there are lots of, you can find lots of sources of information about becoming a childminder. My expertise isn't with childminding, it's with nurseries. Preschools are fairly similar. The difference with preschools is that they tend to be sessional. So they are what we used to call preschool playgroups. Now they tend to be called preschools, and they are for children aged usually 2.5 upwards. And that's a sort of like pre-starting school sessional care for parents that quite often don't work. Now, the advantage of those for people that want part-time work is that they can be term time only, and they're shorter hours because they're usually 9 till 12 or thereabouts. Sometimes they're 9 till 3, but they're much shorter days. But obviously, if you're looking for a career, then it's very limited as a career. The pay isn't usually very good, and you're basically just providing short hours, and you're a helper in a quite a small setting, and there's often less career opportunities. So my expertise is with nurseries, and with nurseries there is very, very much a career structure. The bad news is that if you've got no qualifications and limited experience, you are starting at the bottom. The good news is you do not need qualifications in order to get started. You can start working in a nursery without any qualifications. If you want to move up the ladder and become a senior practitioner, a nursery manager, anything like that, then you will need to get qualifications. So if I talk to you a little bit about qualifications, the gold standard always used to be called the NNEB. You may have heard of the NNEB, and back in the day when they were called nursery nurses. We don't call them that anymore. We tend to call them early years practitioners. A few nurseries call their practitioners early years teachers or early years educators, but generally speaking, most people call them early years practitioners. To be an early years practitioner, the standard qualification is level 3. So it's usually an MVQ, or it might be a BTEC, but it's a level 3 qualification, and that's the standard qualification. If you're a level 2, you're a qualified nursery assistant, which means you're never left in charge of anything. You can't be responsible for other people. You can only be responsible within a group of children, looking after children. If you're a level 3, you can actually become a nursery manager just with the level 3. Having said that, it is becoming more professionalised. People are being encouraged to do level 4 courses, level 5, which is foundation degree, and then degrees and postgraduate qualifications. Now, if you have a degree in any other subject, might be, I don't know, systems analysis or anything at all, if you have a degree in any other subject, you can use your degree with your experience and go for a thing called early years teacher status. It used to be called early years professional status. It's now called early years teacher status. It's not quite the same as qualified teacher status. That's a bone of contention within the sector. But early years teacher status means that you don't need to bother with the level 2, level 3. You can just go straight for that if you've got experience and you've got a degree. So the degree doesn't have to be in early years. If the degree is in early years, then you're already there, and you top it up by getting the postgraduate qualification of early years teacher status. And at the moment, there is funding for that. So it doesn't cost anything to do, because most local authorities are funding that completely. The downside is it quite often requires a day release, not necessarily a day a week, but some form of absence from a setting. So you'd have to find a nursery or early years setting that is willing for you to do that. But if you're coming into early years with a degree, that is definitely a route to consider, because it means you can just go straight for that level. If, on the other hand, you don't have a degree, or you'd rather get straight in and work as a practitioner more quickly, the quickest route is to do an early years qualification while you're working in the setting, an MVQ, basically, early years educator status. So, and that you can do quite quickly. I would say 9 months to a year. You could certainly do a level 3 within a year. If you've got any experience of working with children, and you're not scared of a little bit of academic work. It's not really high level academic work. It's sort of A-level standard, I suppose. But if you're not scared of doing that, then go straight for the level 3. You don't need to bother with a level 2. Sometimes people will encourage you to go for a level 2, and there's no reason why you can't do that. But to me, if you feel confident enough to go for a level 3, then go straight for a level 3. But it does depend on the level of experience that you've got.
Sorry, can I just ask, is, in terms of experience, do you have to have worked with children, or is having children enough?
So when I say experience, that doesn't have to be working with children. It could be that you've been a parent and then you've got parenting experience. There's nothing technically to stop you going to work in a nursery with no experience whatsoever. It's just highly unlikely that a nursery will take you on, because obviously you would be on the national minimum wage. For most nurseries, if you're going in with no experience, you'd be on the national minimum wage. And to be honest, most nurseries will take you on at the national minimum wage or not much above it, unless you've got some sort of qualification that's relevant or relevant work experience. If you're coming with other early years experience, then that would count and might move you up. There's a big difference in the types of settings, and you would need to do your homework, depending on where you live, about the settings in your area. And don't be put off if you get brushed off by the first few that you approach. And do be a little bit choosy, is what I would say. So you need to find a nursery that you feel will nurture you, will support you with your training, because you don't really want to go in, I would suggest, just to be a dog's body. And if you're unqualified, you will always be given some of the dog's body tasks. And to be a key person, which is when you are responsible for a particular child and you're their key person, you usually need a qualification. So I would always encourage anybody to go for a qualification. And also, when you have some experience, whether that's just parenting experience or working with children, it actually enlightens you as to things that you do know already, but you don't know what they're labelled as. So, for example, after I trained as a secondary school English teacher, and when I started running my own nursery, I had qualified staff, and I did my early years training after I'd already started running the nursery. I was just running it as a business, employing qualified staff, but I got sucked into it, really enjoyed it and loved it. And one of the things I learnt about was schemas. And schemas are when children exhibit patterns of behaviour. And straight away I thought, oh, that's what my boys have been doing. Because I had, at the time, two very young children, I had 4 children, but 2 of them were boys. And they both had what we would call a connecting schema, which is lining up. It started off with cars, then it was Brio trains and carriages. Then when they ran out of those, they'd add on animals we lived above the nursery, remember, so they had access to a wide range of things. Now this train of this sort of snake went all over the house, up the stairs, down the stairs, everywhere, and they ended up using little blocks, every toy you could possibly imagine, creating this big long chain. They took their connecting schema to the extreme because they had the resources to do it. When you find out what a child has as a particular schema, you can use that interest to channel them into other directions and to encourage them to do things that you want them to do. I mean, I didn't have a problem with them doing that, but it's really interesting to observe children's cognitive development and obviously their social emotional development, all those things, absolutely fascinating. You will never get bored working in a nursery if you have any interest in children whatsoever, because they grow and develop so rapidly. If you've had your own children, you will know that. And the lovely thing...
Sorry, it just makes me think that as parents, we should do this. We should do training. We may have some kind of idea rather than talk about learning on the job.
Yeah. It is learning on the job, and depending on what your experience is, it may all be new to you, because you might have had a very placid, quiet child yourself, and now all of a sudden you're faced with children who are not placid and quiet, or vice versa. So it's very, very interesting, because I can't stress this enough, every child is unique, every child is different, and development happens at different rates for different parts of their development. So you might have a very articulate child who is speaking very early on, but physically may not be particularly advanced. You can have it the other way around. And you might have a very articulate, intelligent child who is socially inept. I've met some adults like that too. So there are so many different types of children, and they change and develop as they grow, and you see that development, and you also realize how influential you are in their development, because they will go home and they will be acting out at home what they have witnessed in the nursery. So you have to be a role model of professional behaviour at all times with your colleagues, with the children and with the parents. Now, one of the most satisfying things, I think, and this is where it's a real advantage if you have a little bit of maturity, is how you deal with parents. If you put yourself in a parent's shoes, they are giving you their most precious possession to look after, and you have to build up that trusting relationship with a parent. But when you get it right, the feedback and the warmth of the relationship you build with that parent, which is professional, but, you know, friendly and warm, it's very, very rewarding, because they are so happy that they are placing their child in a safe pair of hands. So learning how to give feedback, and to give feedback in an appropriate way, I find, having worked with hundreds of staff over the last 30 years, that maturity counts for a great deal, because young qualified staff will sometimes have no idea how upsetting they might be in giving negative feedback to a parent, because if they've not been a parent themselves, they don't know what it feels like. So the early years sector at the moment is facing a recruitment crisis, which is really good news for anybody that is looking for a job. We struggle, and so do most other nurseries struggle, to get really good quality staff. There's a particular shortage of qualified staff, and because there's a shortage of qualified staff, there may be vacancies which are only available for qualified staff. So if you want to be guaranteed a job, then you can get a qualification by going to college, and then going into working in a nursery, but you can train your way up. So it's just a question of finding a nursery that has a vacancy for an unqualified practitioner. And there are plenty of jobs, absolutely plenty of jobs. You actually could be quite choosy about where you go to work, but you do need to search for the jobs, because not every nursery advertises them where you might think of looking. So it's always worth just sending an email to every nursery in your area to say, I'm looking to change career, I want to work with children, I've got this experience, whether it's just family or whatever, and what you're keen on. Just write an intelligent email or letter, I mean email I would suggest, just to see if they have any vacancies, and if they're looking for people, they might well get back to you, and you know, you can do a bit of a shortcut. Nurseries do not like using agencies. They do not like using recruitment agencies, because they cost a fortune. Yeah. And one thing I have to warn you about the early years sector, it is not particularly well paid. It gets better as you move your way up. So managers, for example, would be on at least 30,000, but below that, you're not talking about much more than 20,000 for a lot of practitioner posts. It's, you know, there aren't many nurseries that are living wage employers, so it works its way up. But you can see what the job roles get salary wise by looking on various websites. It's and some organisations will have it on their websites, so do suss out the different nursery groups websites. So some of the big chains, for example, will have their pay scales advertised. We always put our rates, I mean there's always a band with our roles, because it does depend on whether you've got experience and qualifications, but you can find out what the bands are. But I do warn you, it's not particularly well paid. It does get a lot better once it's an industry where you can very, very quickly rise up the ladder. You can be starting with no qualifications, and 3 years later you could be managing the nursery. It can be that quick if you've got the right determination, the right aptitude, and you're willing to do as much training as you can possibly do and learn as quickly as you possibly can. Then if you're mature in particular, then you can rise quite quickly. You may not particularly want to be a manager, actually. It's not what everybody wants. If you want to work with the children, you don't want to be stuck in the office, then actually you might just want to become a really good early years practitioner, and there's a real shortage of those. And a lot of nursery organisations will really value those and pay reasonable salaries to keep you once you get to that point, when when you've demonstrated your worth. So I would recommend it.
So just to reiterate again, the how long it takes to do sort of the level 2 and the level 3, and if I decide to go to college or all those?
Right, the timescale for training then. So a college course will typically be 2 years. It's usually 1 year for the level 2, and then the second year is the level 3. So you come out fully qualified after 2 years. There may be some colleges that do it more quickly than that, but the ones I'm aware of, it tends to be a 2-year full-time course. And part of that course, you would do placements at different places. If you do the training in the setting, then I think the level 2 course is 9 months to a year, and the same again for the level 3, which is why I would recommend, if you possibly can, go straight for the level 3. If you've got maturity and intelligence, you don't need much experience to be able to go straight for a level 3. And that's the basic level of qualification, level 2 then level 3, or straight for level 3.
Wow. I'm just really surprised. Why isn't everyone doing this?
It's not very well paid.
Yes, there is that. But I would also perhaps argue that many sort of mature people who, they reach an age where they realize, do you know what? It's finally time to do something I enjoy, yeah. Rather than just follow the money.
Yeah, maybe I'll say something about that, actually. We have noticed over recent years an increasing number of people coming in with some maturity, some previous experience in other sectors. Quite often it's after they've had their own children and their children have grown up and gone to school, that they want a change of direction. They don't want to go back full-time to the very pressured jobs they were in before. And the one thing that you can get from early years work is a huge amount of job satisfaction. And there was a survey done, I can't remember who did it, there was a survey done not recently, and early years workers came out as having the highest job satisfaction. So, and that's not from being well paid, it's from actually enjoying the job. But as I say, what other job is there that you can think, oh, it's a really nice day today, let's spend all day outside, let's go and take a picnic to the local park, let's take all this activity outside, and as long as you don't get sunburnt and you've got shade and sun cream, there's nothing to stop you spending huge amounts of time outside responding to the weather. It's snowing, let's go and build a snowman. There's just so much freedom and creativity, and what you will learn is that that's not just going out and building a snowman or playing in water. With the water, you can do so much science. With the snowman, there's science involved in what happens to snow. Where is snow come from? What happens if we take snow inside and it all melts? That's science. If you have a washing line and you're hanging out flannels or whatever with the children, the way the washing is drying is something that you can talk to them about. Well, why is it, we're putting it on wet and then it becomes dry. They learn so much science from very simple basic facts. And maths, for example, if you want to teach division to 3-year-olds, and that might sound complicated, but if you have 3 children and you've got 9 grapes, then they can very quickly work out what an equal share would be each. Actually, with grapes, you have to cut them up because health and safety, choking hazard, blah, blah, blah. But there are so many easy ways, like, let's set the table for lunch. There's 6 of us. Well, how many knives and how many forks do we need? And asking children to do, to go and count out 6 knives and 6 forks. That's basic maths, but it's meaningful maths. And so what you realize is that all this stuff that you do and in a more leisured way. So children need to learn before they go to school. You ask any reception teacher, what they really want with children coming in is that they can take themselves to the toilet and they can put their coats on, they can do all those basic things. Now, learning to put your own coat on isn't as simple as it sounds. And if you've been a very busy parent rushing off to work and bundling your child off to nursery, chances are you haven't spent time encouraging them to do their own coat up for themselves because you're in a hurry. But in a nursery, we have all the time in the world to allow children the opportunity to learn how to put their coats on. And there's lots of tricks in learning how to put your coats on. The same with, boots and shoes and socks and all that kind of stuff. So learning basic skills like that, because you can take your time over it and make a fun job of it, then it all becomes much more meaningful, worthwhile. It's hard work, but it's a leisured kind of hard work. It's only hard work because if you've got grandchildren that you look after for a day, that you don't have them all day every day, at the end of the day you're exhausted. Well, it's no different working in a nursery. You'll be exhausted by the end of the day, but then you learn to pace yourselves with the children. So children need quiet, snuggle time to look at stories, sit on your lap and read a story. So you make the most of that time. You don't have to be rushing around outside all the time. Children need a balance of activities. They need to be able to rush around outside, but they need to be able to snuggle down and have a quiet time as well, particularly when they're in full day care and they're in from, they might come in and have breakfast with you, they might have lunch and tea with you. You see more of them than their parents do, and it becomes a homely atmosphere because it needs to be. It's not the same as school. It's not the same even as preschool. A pack away preschool session only has children for about 3 hours, so they can just come and do their early learning activities and then go home. In a day nursery, you've got lunch to sort out, and then after lunch you have a nice little quiet time where some of the children will have a sleep, and it's a different pace because it needs to be, because children are there all day and they can't cope with a frenetic pace of activity. They need quiet time as well as all the fun and games and physical activity.
I'll do the sleep.
I have had staff fall asleep at sleep time.
Gosh, it's awesome. I mean, like, what's so fascinating is you can so tell that you are genuinely passionate about this.
Actually, I haven't said anything about forest schools. Can I quickly talk about forest schools?
Please do, yes. Oh my gosh, that's my favourite.
So, one of my favourite aspects of early years, and this might be a very sexist assumption, but this often appeals particularly to the dads who might be joining us or men who want to get involved in childcare, but forest schools are absolutely brilliant. They're not suitable for you if you really don't like outdoors except on fair weather days, because forest schools have to take place every day of the year pretty much. To be a proper forest school, it needs to happen all year round. Children need to witness the change in the seasons. They need to be outside, obviously wrapped up accordingly for the seasons, but they need to see natural environments all through the year. And forest schools give you the opportunity to allow children to develop that relationship with the natural world, but also the autonomy that they have in a forest school means that they learn skills of social skills and technical skills, den building, for example, that you can never learn in a sort of sterile nursery garden, which might have astroturf and plastic toys. It's a totally different experience. It's hugely beneficial for their emotional well-being. It is for adults too. I mean, again, COVID has exposed the importance of being out and about in natural environments. Is, just to stand under the trees and listen to the bird song, to observe the little things, to look at a leaf that's, budding at this time of the year or in the spring. It's how the leaves are unfolding and how the leaves change, and how what is at the moment maybe a dry sandy bank becomes an absolute mudslide in the winter. But the trees also vary because they might be bare and all the light is coming through now, because I'm in April, but in the summer you may not see much of the sky because you might be covered by trees and leaves. And then of course you've got all the fallen leaves in the autumn, which are hugely fun in themselves. And then of course all the mini beasts. If you like mini beasts, children are fascinated by mini beasts, and you can find mini beasts in any nursery garden because most nursery gardens will have bug hotels.
Yes,
so
I remember the bug hotels.
Mini bugs are fascinating for any child.
And is there a different type of training, or is it the same? Is there anything that you can do?
If you're working in a nursery, you can do a kind of forest school without any additional training. But to be a proper forest school leader, there is a level 3 qualification that you need to have. And there's also an outdoor first aid qualification that sits alongside that. So that's usually done when you've already got your level 3 qualification. Usually forest school leaders are already early years practitioners. It really helps to have that basic level of understanding, and some forest school leaders, some forest school training won't accept you on the training unless you're qualified. So you usually have to do the early years qualification first. I think you can go straight in to do forest school training, but that wouldn't qualify you to work in a nursery. So that would only, and obviously most nurseries and schools, preschools will do forest schools as part of their provision. There aren't many nature kindergartens that are purely forest schools. There are a few, and they are growing in number, but there aren't huge numbers of them. So it tends to be an add-on. The forest school experience is an add-on, but it's a really important add-on, and it's just, if you're into forest schools, they are the best. They are so
we actually have two very, very close by to where we live, and whenever, because we have been walking a lot, haven't we? And whenever we walk past them, and I just think, wow, this is.
Yeah, I wish they were around when my kids were little. They'd have loved them, but there wasn't a thing.
I grew up in Sweden, and we called it forest school. We were just out all the time.
Yeah,
it was, when I moved here and I realised that children didn't necessarily have like what we would call the right clothes for rain. What? Yeah.
No such thing as bad weather, just wrong clothing.
Yeah. We skied to school. Born in the 1800s, but it's true. We skied to school. We were out literally all year round. There was no such thing as indoor play.
Yeah, and it's quite bizarre because Scotland is better than England at forest schools, and yet they're cold. It's colder up there than it is in England, and some settings in England are very poor at outdoor play. But it is now more and more recognised how much time children need to spend outdoors.
And do you see that generally? Are there more forest schools opening generally?
Yes. There are, and more nurseries do offer forest schools. Sometimes I'm a bit of a forest school snob sometimes, because it's not what I call proper forest school. If you're not using tools and you're not using fire, then for me it's not a fully fledged forest school. With a forest school, you go out, you cook their lunch over a fire, and you use tools to whittle wood and create things and make things, but you have to be trained to do those. So obviously you can have a sort of nature environment, you can go for a nature walk and do nature activities, but it's not technically a forest school unless you tick all the boxes. And again, there's plenty of websites to the Forest School Association. You can look on there for details about how to become an outdoors. But the bushcraft is the other one for older children. If you're working with school-age children, it's quite often bushcraft is the thing rather than forest schools. And actually that's one thing I'd mention. One of the things for me that always guarantees anybody to get an interview is if they've got any experience of working with brownies, guides, cubs, you name it, any of those voluntary organisations that work with children. If you have worked and got some experience with those, and you can verify it with a reference, that counts as really valuable experience for two reasons. One, you're doing a fun activity mostly with the right age children, so it's genuinely the right experience, but you're also doing it on a voluntary basis. Now that more than anything else demonstrates that you are keen to work with children. So I would recommend anybody to give that a go, working with brownies, guides, cubs, whatever, or the various, some kind of voluntary experience working with children. And voluntary experience is also a good way for you to test the water to see, is it really what you want to do? Most nurseries would welcome volunteers. You have to do a DBS check, but it doesn't cost anything if you're a volunteer. So it's worth doing a little bit of voluntary experience if you can. Most nurseries will welcome it if you explain, I'm looking to change career, I'd like to get some voluntary experience. Don't get taken for a ride and end up being an unpaid helper. Do it for a limited period of time, just to test the water to see if you enjoy it, and to see what that particular nursery is like. But it's certainly worth doing.
That is a great point, because that's essentially job shadowing, which is what we offer. But yes, I think that is a very, very important point. I think you can very easily, just be seen as an extra body.
Yeah, don't get these like internships.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We've not done that. Gosh, we are like absolutely flying through all the questions that I've put to you. What are some of the less enjoyable bits? Because this is all fun. This is
okay. Some of the less enjoyable bits, apart from the low pay. I keep saying the low pay, but it is relatively, and I don't want anybody to be under any illusions that it's a well-paid sector, because it isn't, although it's improving. I would say the less enjoyable aspects can be the sheer exhaustion, because it can be very, very tiring when you're working with children all day with only a lunch break, and maybe, if you're lucky, a coffee break or tea break, but wouldn't guarantee those. So it can be physically exhausting, hard work. Obviously, there are things like nappies to change. You wouldn't be expected to do those straight away, because it should be, if it's a good nursery, it should be the key persons that do the nappy change. You get to know a particular child, and intimate routines like toileting and nappy changes should be done by a practitioner who knows that individual child. So, but obviously that's not particularly pleasant, nor is clearing up mess made by other bodily functions. When children are poorly, they will sometimes just projectile everywhere. So, you know, every nursery has spare clothes for accidents. So there's clearing up to be done all the time, you know, clearing up, not just those after meal times. They can be really messy eaters. Every messy activity creates mess. So you have to not mind getting messy. If you're very particular about your appearance, then think twice, because you will go home covered in stuff, paint, Play-Doh, whatever, mud. You will get, you know, snotty noses wiped on your leg. So those sorts of, you know, that's probably the bits that might put people off, I guess. And that actually, one of the it's been called emotional labour, but it can be quite stressful if children are unsettled. So if a child is starting nursery with not enough settling in sessions, or is going through a bad time at home, you know, maybe they've got a new sibling and they're feeling unsettled because of that, or if they're a bit under the weather themselves, a crying child will really stress you out. It's very hard to ignore. We shouldn't ignore a crying child, but if you've got a crying child that you can't easily soothe and you don't have a solution for it, then the sound of a child crying can be very, very stressful. Doesn't happen that much, thankfully, but there are sometimes you have a child that takes a while settling, and they can be very whingy, very whiny, or genuinely upset, which is even worse. And that's the test of a nursery. How does a nursery react when there's a crying child? If they have an attitude, oh, you know, you'll be all right, or they've got to get used to it, don't work at that nursery, because that's not a caring nursery. You need to be choosy and find a nursery with a good ethos, because otherwise you end up taking on bad habits, and that's not good for anybody. So it's distressing if you think things aren't being done well, or if you find that your colleagues, I mean, they always say that you don't leave a job, you leave the manager. Or that it might be that you find yourself in a team which is quite dysfunctional. They tend to be, 97% female, so that can engender a certain kind of culture, that, you know, if you're a male, that might not be very comfortable, but even if you're a female, you might not want to work with a load of women, particularly, you know, hormones here, there and everywhere, because we have them at both ends. But, you know, the age range is from teenagers up to menopausal women. I'm an expert in the menopause with my staff.
Wow, I mean, that I can see that being quite the interesting clash.
But if it's a good nursery with an ethic of care, it can also be very, very supportive, and camaraderie and teamwork can be really, really emotionally warming. So through the pandemic, when we kept going, most of the nurseries were able to stay open all the way through, even when there was a lockdown for everybody apart from vulnerable or key children. Those staff that carried on going, the camaraderie with them was absolutely brilliant. And even the ones that were on furlough, there were constant Zoom calls and quizzes, and they were putting together little videos to send to the children that were at home that couldn't come to nursery. There was some lovely, lovely teamwork going on, even when we couldn't be physically together as a team. So,
I mean, that is, I mean, generally speaking, or the sort of the survey that we've done in terms of what actually drives people, what do they like about their job? It is never about money, genuinely never about money. It may be a reason why they sort of at the moment have to stay in their job, But when it comes to job satisfaction, it is genuinely never about the money. It is about, a team. And it is exactly about this making a difference and making it feel like you're actually doing something that makes a difference and is worth doing. And that, this ticks all of those boxes.
Yeah. One other aspect that I haven't mentioned is children with additional needs. Quite often nurseries will need to take on staff to provide one-to-one care for children with additional needs. That can be very rewarding if you've got an interest in children with special needs. That might be physical problems. We've had Down's children, we've had children with quite complex medical needs. There's a large number of children who are on the autistic spectrum, and their behaviour can be extremely challenging. But there are things that you can learn how to work with children that have challenging behaviour. So that can be very, very rewarding, working with children with additional needs. And also when you're working in settings where they have children who are coming from socially deprived backgrounds, that can be very rewarding because you're often offering something they do not get at home in terms of the resources, the access to the outdoor space. So it can be very rewarding when you really notice how quickly those children develop because they're being given access to books that they may not have at home. Their language skills develop very quickly. Children with English as an additional language always stun me in how intelligently they deal with this whole business of two languages. It's incredible. So there are so many rewarding aspects to the additional challenges that you face. And supporting families who are going through a hard time, that can be really, that can be challenging when you've got warring parents who are divorcing and they have different ideas about what their children want. We're very clear whose side we're on. We're on the side of the child. So we don't get involved in argy-bargy between parents. We are there to support the child and do what's best for the child. Sometimes that involves working with social services, with multi-agencies. We have speech therapists coming in, health visitors coming in. There's all sorts of additional resources that we can signpost people to. Sometimes we have parents who need additional support themselves in order to understand admission forms or other documents. So we do quite a bit of work with families who are very needy for a variety of reasons, but that's very rewarding, really rewarding. It's sometimes harder work working with the middle-class professional parents who want their 2-year-old to be able to learn the alphabet, before they can do anything else. And then you have to be clear what your ethos is in that particular nursery. There are some nurseries who have a much more formal education basis than others. But generally speaking, most people recognise that children learn best through play. It's about creating those learning experiences, those teachable moments, and you will learn how to create teachable moments. And there is some paperwork. Well, actually, mostly not paperwork these days. It's mostly online. So most nurseries these days have apps that they use to record children's development. But that can be really satisfying. And most apps these days also, you take photos, videos, you can send those direct to the parents. So the parents in their offices or wherever get little videos or pictures of what their child is up to. So you're building that relationship with the family through the videos and photos that you take and the observations that you might write down. So there's a lot to it. People do underestimate what is involved in early years, and there is a lot to it.
There is a lot too. I think that is definitely, it's a lot. It's a lot. But I absolutely, living in Southwest London, and when, we didn't, well, like I said, I grew up in Sweden, and when we then had children, I was absolutely adamant that my children were not going to learn anything before the age of 7. And then it turns out that I have academic children, and I was hugely disappointed. They really wanted to learn.
Forcing them to learn and responding. I mean, responding to their desire to learn is how it should be. And if they want to learn and they want to be able to write their names, then that's absolutely fine. Some children will want to, but other children are on their own little trajectory, and we need to follow their lead. So it's about being responsive and recognizing, actually, this child is playing up because they're bored. We're not stretching them enough.
Yes.
creating opportunities for sustained shared thinking and problem solving, and saying, well, what do you think might happen if you do that? And, you know, getting them to think things through, because that's how they learn.
Yeah.
So there's so much you can do it doesn't have to be a formal learning experience.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, but then similarly, I've had lots of friends who are really, really stressing, you know, after reception, and, you know, their child can't write joined up writing. And I said, Jesus, most countries, they haven't even started school yet.
Yeah. How to turn off children, how to turn them off learning.
Yeah. Right. I mean, literally, they are the most inquisitive, imaginative beings until we send them to school, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's heartbreaking, really, to see how badly it's done sometimes.
Well, it is, and I think
because children aren't designed to sit still. They're not designed to. They don't have bodies that are physically designed to sit at tables. They need to be active, especially boys. But they need to be active.
I mean, it's that to me, and I said this when we moved here and they started reception. So I've got 2 boys, and I said to her, and I said, I don't really know how you're going to be able to do this with my child. And she said, don't worry, you know, of course, my child isn't the most special child in the world. They've had 1,000 children like him before, but I just could not see how you're going to get 15 children to sit down for a whole day. I just couldn't see how that was going to happen. But of course, you know, they have their, you know, the clap thing, and everyone starts clapping, and everyone said, we've tried that at home. It doesn't work. It doesn't. You have to be Miss Lucy to do that. You know, it's some sort of magic that they do. But it's incredible. And I have to say, forest school, if that had been an option for us, 100%. I mean, how could you not love that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Incredible. And I tell my friends how I had a knife at the age of 6. You know, we went out into the forest and we built, I don't know what we built, houses and dens and all kinds of stuff. And, you know, we got home and our parents, dads mostly, made sure that we had a really sharp knife, because that is less dangerous.
It is, yeah. Yeah.
And, you know, my friends think, you're crazy.
No, I mean, we've been doing forest schools for about 15 years now, and we've never had a serious, well, actually, we've had a couple of broken bones, but only a couple, and nothing to do with anything dangerous, just, but we've had no serious accidents, apart from one practitioner actually cutting himself. But we've also had a lot of children with autism and behavioural problems, and we quite often, because we do school-age children in school holidays, we've discovered at the end of a week or 2 weeks with a child coming to us that actually when they're at school they have one-to-one supervision because they're so badly behaved, and we've not had any problems with them, because when they're given that freedom, that autonomy and that trust and that respect, and no arbitrary rules, because in forest school you do have rules, but they are rules that children understand because they can see that fire is dangerous. So there need to be, you know, guidelines and rules, and they know that they can't go wandering off beyond that tree there because forest school is happening here and we don't want you going further than where we can see you. We've never lost a child. They've never gone wandering off. You know, it's just amazing, just fabulous, because we underestimate children's intelligence, I think, and their ability to apply some common sense.
But doesn't that make you... Is there any kind of, I mean, now we're going totally off topic, but is there not any kind of studies being done on autistic children and forest schools and how that...
There are some. There's certainly not many in this country, but there have been done some, and mostly with older children, not many with the younger end of things. So yeah, we've got our own little action research groups. That's one of the things we're looking at, about, because we work with a special school as well. They've sent several staff of theirs on forest school training because they recognise that particularly autistic children, they benefit from being outside. They just really do benefit from it.
I mean, they have a couple of autistic children at our school, and they basically, the parents say that we are essentially just paying for 4 walls, because they have to bring in their own assistant. They can't really sit in the classroom with the other children. So they spend some time either in the corridor or outside in the playground. And you go, why are you paying for this? This is just craziness.
Yeah.
And they all of them say, oh, if we just go outside, it's fine. I mean, gosh, I mean, I don't have autistic children in any way. And the amount of times when, especially when they were even younger, in the summer, I'd literally just put all the clothes outside of the door, close the front door, at least for outside, and then we can take a deep breath. And, if you get cold, then you guess you'll put some clothes on and, we're out, because it's just a different mindset. It's totally different thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's fascinating. That's what I want to do. I say this because I'm so choosy with.
If anybody wants an individual consultation, then we could offer that, because it wouldn't necessarily need to be with me. It could be with one of my colleagues. So I would be able to give advice on training and qualifications, depending on what your background is and what you've already got. So a bit more detail about what the actual options are, to talk through and answer any questions about what it's like working in a nursery, or what the different job roles are, to go in more detail for what might suit one specific person, and to take a realistic view of what your career prospects might be, given your background, your experience, your abilities, and also to give some advice and guidance on what you might want to advertise yourselves with to potential employer. So, if there might be something on your CV that you wouldn't think of mentioning, it's because it's funny, like having children, you don't normally boast about that on a CV, but if you've looked after your children for any length of time, that's an advantage when just having any kind of experience with any kind of children is worth emphasizing. But also picking out what are the transferable skills from your CV that it's worth talking about, and I can give you ideas on the sorts of questions that always get asked at interview, so that you can have a think about how best to answer them, and the no-nos, what not to say.
Fantastic. That's really, really awesome. Thank you so much, Zoe. This has been really eye-opening, and I have to say, I actually trained to be a teacher in Sweden, but I was absolutely not ready, because I then realised that I didn't particularly like children, so I emigrated to England
to get away from the children.
Pretty much.
How old are your children now?
7 and 9, so they're quite little. But I've realised that they're all right. Some of them, actually, those little ones, the little
everybody has their preferred age range. Actually, I think there's. I mean, within a nursery, you're either a baby room person or you're not.
Yeah.
So some people are baby room people, and some people much prefer the 3 and 4 year olds who can talk back to you. The 2-year-olds are the nightmare group, I think, because they're what you're constantly toilet training, constantly. And they will have meltdowns and not understand why they're having a meltdown. So, the emotional instability of a 2-year-old is...
God, I feel we're still there. I feel we're still there with the emotional instability.
But yeah, everybody has their favourite age group. I think my favourite age group are actually adults. I like working with adults. I like working with I love working with adult learners. I think, especially when they don't have particularly women don't have a lot of confidence in their own abilities, and they take their skills and experience for granted, and they don't realise what they're capable of and how valuable it can be.
100%. I mean, that's
what you're all about, isn't it?
Exactly.
Giving people the confidence to go out and start again.
And you can literally tell people this until you're blue in the face, but it is this, go out there and try it. And that is when especially women realise, I can totally do this.
Yeah, absolutely.
But now actually I don't want to. So many roles women go into, they thought they couldn't do it, they realise they can do it, but now actually don't want it. It's incredible how often that happens.
One thing I didn't mention is that when you asked about are there any jobs out there, there is also a desperate shortage of people willing to be play workers. Our play workers are people that work with out of school clubs. So that might be breakfast clubs, after school clubs. There is always a desperate shortage of people wanting to work in after school clubs, for the simple reason that the hours of work are so small, because it's 3 till 6. And so it's antisocial hours for anybody with young children. It's not great to go and work in an out of school club, and it's only, you know, it might only be 15 hours a week if you just do the out of school club. If you do the breakfast club as well, that's usually an hour in the morning as well, full time in the holidays. It can be combined with working in a preschool to make more of a all year round job, and it's working with school age children. But you're working with school age children at the end of the day when they've had a day at school and they just need to let off steam. So you've got to really want to have fun and be patient and be empathetic, because some of these kids are going through a difficult time. You know, if they haven't got a friend that day, or their friend has said something nasty to them, they can be an emotional wreck. And, you know, it's the end of the day, they want to relax and chill or have fun. And so play workers provide a really vital service in providing a range of different activities for school age children before their parents pick them up and take them home. And sometimes, you know, that's a happier environment for them than going home, because they've got their friends, they can have fun with their friends. So play work is not to be sneezed at. You do not need a qualification for play work, you just need some experience, and you can get experience by doing it. So you start off working with somebody that is experienced, but you do not have to have a qualification for play work. You have to have a DBS, you do need some experience, you need energy, enthusiasm, patience, and some creativity always goes down well, because actually children like making things, they like doing different things. So, you know, making pizzas and whatever, there's all sorts of things they like doing, but there's a shortage of play workers. So that might be a starting point for people if they want to work with older children.
Amazing. Gosh, there's so many jobs.
There are.
So many jobs.
Yeah, there really are.
That is...
And there's a desperate shortage of men in early years. You're guaranteed a job if you're a man applying for a job, I think. Unless there's something wrong with you, you're guaranteed a job, because every nursery that I know of is desperate to employ more men. And what we find is that it's easier to recruit a man in a nursery where you've already got at least one man. So I've got nurseries with 2 or 3, but then I've got others with none. And it's quite hard because it's a bit tough being the only man in them. And sometimes the other man might be a cook.
Yeah.
But quite often they rise through the hierarchy very quickly. And they go down the storm with the children. Children love having a male practitioner, because it's somebody different. It's a different, slightly, you know, don't want to get into the gender debate, because actually it is all gendering. It's nothing to do with your biological sex. It's nothing about, you know, men are better at rough and tumble and women are kinder and more patient. That's rubbish. It's neuro trash. But it's our gendered upbringing means that, you know, men aren't seen as being naturally more caring. So it's not seen as a natural profession for them. But those men that are in early years are really valued, really valued.